Welcome to a summary of our findings of our home working project so far. We are going to use this opportunity to go through some of the key findings from the project, which started in May this year and is continuing until August 2021. So we're really delighted that you have clicked on this and are listening to our findings. So thank you for joining us today, and any of you that have been involved in this project, for any of our participants who are watching this, thank you for making this possible. Without you, obviously, we would not have been able to gain the insights that we have, and it's just been amazing to have this opportunity to understand how people are coping with home working and what their intentions are going forwards. So we'd like to start with just a little bit of background about the project, about the home working scenario, and then my three colleagues here, who will introduce themselves as they're speaking, will give a summary of the findings so far. So, as you are probably aware, on the 23rd of March 2020, the UK government announced lockdown, and the response to that was clearly that businesses had to move very, very fastly to reconfigure traditional office jobs into a home working scenario, and that's really, at that point, is the focus of our project. From there onwards, how people are coping with this new world of work based in the home. So in 2019, so if we're looking at, say, maybe the end of 2019, only 5% of the UK labour force fully worked from home, with 27% occasionally working from home. Hit April 2020, nearly half, so 47% of people in employment are working from home, and that number is only slightly reduced in the current day. So we had a mass home working experiment, which was unforeseen, and the horrible word unprecedented, and we are just trying to find out how people are coping with that, what the problems are, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and how this is going to change the world of work going forwards. So home working has presented lots of new possibilities, but it's also presented a number of pitfalls as well. So I'll just give a very quick overview of the project itself. So we have 80 workers from across the UK in all sorts of different groups. Some of you who are hopefully listening to this recording, we've got a combination of men and women, and we are repeating interviews, which are lasting between about an hour and a half, 2 hours, with 80 participants, and we are interviewing them 4 times across the project, which is lasting for about 15 months. We are also running 2 surveys so far, and hopefully we're going to launch a 3rd one. And the first survey had 1,338 UK home-based workers, again across the UK, across different occupational groups. And the winter survey, which we've launched over the last few weeks, we're looking at similar numbers. And all of these tools, these instruments, these interviews, these surveys, are aiming to capture the experience of home working for the UK population, and the lives of people living with the home workers in these unprecedented times. The aim is to shed light on our understanding of the new expectations that organisations have placed on you and on us as workers, and how they are providing support systems, but also you in your own domestic environment and your own internal resources are providing support systems for yourself, and the technology that organisations are providing, but also how you are coping with the technology and what has been put in place. We're really delighted at the impact so far. We've been asked to give evidence to the UK government, the House of Lords, and also the Welsh government. We've had lots of invites to speak from businesses, both public and private sector, and we've had quite a bit of media interest. Particularly, we were very influential in Singapore for a small period of time, which is really funny. So it's been great. So for all the participants, thank you so much. We wouldn't have gained these insights without you, and we can see we're having a really big impact. We are hopefully going to have a voice, both in business and at policy level, so that's great. So now I am just going to start handing over to my colleagues. We're going to really focus on 4 main areas in terms of the findings from the project, the experience of home-based working, digital technology and social interaction, the impact of home-based working on work-life and work-life balance, and the impact of home-based working on well-being. And before she continue, I say, my name's Abigail Marks, and I am going to now hand over to my colleague, Oliver Mallett.
Thanks, Abigail. So my name's Oliver Mallett. I'm an associate professor in work and employment at the University of Stirling. For my brief section, I just want to give a little bit of background and context. Obviously, lockdown was a big shock. As Abigail had said, it was unprecedented and it put a lot of our lives into turmoil. This quote from one of our participants, one of the people that we interviewed, who's a male school teacher, sums up what the experience of that was for some of us. He said, I mean, in terms of where we work, I'm set up downstairs in the living room. We've got a little study that my wife tends to use with the computer. In there, my daughter has her bedroom that she works in. She's got an iPad. My son has his iPad. He's also got a laptop and he either works, he can work in his bedroom, or sometimes he prefers to work in the kitchen. Just depends, really. But, you know, it's not easy. They're very much, I'm sure, like every family, it's peaks and troughs in terms of people's moods, in terms of the levels of concentration. But, you know, we've been okay. We picked this quote because, well, not all of us have families. For many of us, a lot of our lives were suddenly condensed within the home. It changed how we interrelate with our social relations, and it changed our working lives. Now, obviously, people have worked from home before lockdown, and we've had many empirical studies that have looked at it, and we've learned that home-based working does have advantages. So a key advantage that many of us have experienced is a reduction in commuting. Not having to travel to work, we can jump straight from our beds to our new office spaces. We save money, potentially we save time. So there's a potential reduction in our working hours through the loss of the commute. We also have increased scope of job opportunities. We can work beyond our local area. We can work, in theory, anywhere in the world if we're working from home. Other advantages from home working, studies have found increased autonomy, creativity, flexibility. We can work in different ways. We can work with different people. Some studies have shown increased in productivity as a result. It gives us the opportunity to learn new skills. It gives us the opportunity to engage in different forms of training. Final area, it can help us to integrate work and non-work obligations. So maybe it helps us to support our care roles, or the greater flexibility it gives us means that we can participate more easily in the school run without having to jump straight in a car and head off to the office. So there's a range of opportunities and advantages that can come with home working, but there are also challenges. So it's been found that home-based working can lead to an intensification of work. We can find ourselves working more intensely. We can find it harder to stop or harder to take breaks. There's no one to perhaps take the breaks with. So that can give us increased risk of social isolation. We gain a lot from being in the workplace, from socializing with colleagues or other people we meet on our way to work, in breaks, things like that. So these are important risks as we work from home. There's also a lack of potential buffers. So what we mean by this is it can be difficult to differentiate the start of the working day, the end of the working day, as I said, in terms of breaks we might take. So that can actually lead to longer working hours, even taking the commute into account. We can also have difficulty switching off from work. I'm currently in my living room, and as I finish work for the day, I'll just be sat over there watching TV. That can make it very difficult to make the mental transition from work to home, and that can create problems. There's also issues around impression management, how I am perceived by my colleagues as I take part in meetings through my laptop and from within my home, how I appear, how I dress, but also impression around how busy I am, how much work I'm doing. Especially before lockdown, where only a small proportion of people working from home, there could be a sense that they're not working hard enough, or they're in some way slacking off while they're at home. There can also be penalties to career development and income. So some studies have found that the people working from home, perhaps because they're out of sight, they're not interacting with managers or colleagues as much on a daily basis, can impact the development of the career, progression, promotion, things like that. So these advantages, challenges of home-based work were things that we knew before from empirical studies. But what's interesting now through this intense experiment in home working is that many of us now know this. Many of us have experienced this firsthand. We have a greater sense of what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what opportunities there are, and what things that we can't cope with, what we need. So it's radically changed the context in which home-based working will be happening going forwards in the long term. Now, it raises the question of what we might then need from our employers and our organisations to support us. So as we move into thinking about the findings of our study, the key thing is getting the basics right. Many of the people that we spoke to felt that organisations supported them where they supported their home working environment, where they made it easier for them to work from home. They didn't put obstacles in their way. So these are the basics: having the right devices, perhaps an ergonomically appropriate chair, having a desk, having a good setup to work in, the appropriate IT equipment, whatever. Now, all organisations did provide this, and where they didn't, people found it much more difficult to work from home. A quote here from one of our participants establishes some of this. She said, "I think getting people comfortable required investment from the business to invest effectively in dispensing tables, chairs, and creating home tech, which again, the business did really well. It took a couple of weeks to get ready, but they didn't really put up any barriers in terms of cost or, risk of security." So the first and primary thing we've identified is organizations need to get the basics right. But of course, there's a lot more beyond this. And as will become apparent as my colleagues talk in much more detail about the findings from our study, what we'll see is organizations have an important role to play. We think it's particularly important that organizations, employers, managers have full and open discussion of the financial implications of home working. This isn't simply a matter of saving money on the commute. There's a range of different financial implications, whether it's the heating bills, especially this time of year, recording this in the depths of winter, electricity for equipment, things like that. But there'll be all kinds of knock-on effects, not just through IT equipment, but the ways in which our lives change. And this will be different for different people. So it's important that organizations don't simply say you're saving money and write off the deeper implications of working from home. It's important that organisations work to mitigate against both direct and indirect forms of discrimination. I've talked about the potential impact on people's career progression, but being out of sight, having less interaction with people at work can lead to forms of direct discrimination, but also indirectly, as there's knock-on effects of perhaps not participating in something that happens outside of work, say everyone going for coffee after work from the office, and that those working from home are excluded or left out and can therefore find themselves missing out on things or in some way disadvantaged. Finally, organizations probably going to need support. So there's going to be a role for policymakers, for organizations such as trade unions, professional bodies, to develop guidance in terms of how organizations can most effectively support their employees and their home working plans. A key area of this going forward is going to be technology, and I'll hand over to my colleague Abigail to talk more about that.
Can you please unmute yourself, Abigail?
Thank you, Oliver. Sorry for the unmuting. So my name, as Oliver said, my name is Abigail Marks. I am Professor of the Future of Work at the University of Newcastle, or Newcastle University, and I'm clearly, although I'm talking about technology, my failure to unmute suggests I'm no practical expert on technology. Okay, so as Oliver alluded to, one of the factors that has enabled us to be able to work effectively from home is this digital technology. So 10, 15 years ago, it would be much harder to transfer such a large proportion of the population to home working because we wouldn't have had the availability of the technology. So this available digital technology, so we're talking about file sharing software, video conferencing software, really everything that is enabled by the internet and hopefully high-speed home broadband has allowed us to work away from the conventional office space and to be able to transfer work into the home environment. And what this has assured is that we can all work relatively uninterrupted, excluding homeschooling, of course, but relatively uninterrupted. We can continue business as normal as possible away from the office. So we've been allowed business continuity. Now, going back to the work or the historical work on the quality of life with home working, one of the benefits of digital technology, it has allowed people to homework, and home working in a normal scenario can increase the quality of life and work-life balance. And this is only afforded, this possibility is only afforded again by digital technology. As we'll see going forward, work-life balance is slightly more challenging under the pandemic scenario. So let's start off with what the problems may be, or what the problems have been with the utilisation of the digital technology from working from home at the moment. So what we found from a lot of our participants is a high level of techno stress. So people have been working constantly with the technology. There's been very little break from the technology. I think we're all still a little bit on edge on ensuring the technology works, and that is clearly enhancing how people feel about home working and the problems associated with it. We're all suffering, both in terms of our professional life and our personal life. We're all suffering from a lack of face-to-face interaction. And I think getting used to Teams meetings or Zoom meetings rather than having face-to-face meetings, it's a different way of interacting. It's a different way of doing business. And people have found this very challenging. One of the other key factors we've found is that what digitally enabled home working has done is increase the number of meetings, increase the number of online meetings people are having, because you can't have that informal knocking on people's doors, giving them a quick phone call in their office. So any information you need from somebody, any conversation you need to have with somebody, it's very much formalized in terms of a Zoom meeting. It's clear that people feel uncomfortable in making quick phone calls to people in their domestic space in a way that they wouldn't if they were in an office environment. There's also issues in terms of e-presenteeism. Because you can't be seen in an office, people are very conscious that they're not be seen to be slacking when working from home. So there's very much a constant wanting to be seen on meetings, sending lots of emails. So there's very much an intensification of work in terms of the number of meetings and the actual physical presence. As I said a couple of minutes ago, one of the things that's enabled us to be able to work from home in this scenario is broadband. And if you've got several people relying on your broadband, on your bandwidth, then that can compromise the effectiveness of home working. If you've got, say, 3 children at home plus a partner at home, also trying to use the same bandwidth, or if you're in an area where broadband isn't as strong, then it is clearly going to compromise your ability to work effectively. There has also been a real mix in terms of organisational support. As Oliver said, both in terms of the physical office space, the need to have really good digital technology, good computing equipment is key to effective home working. There's very much a perception of people working harder and more intensively, but there's a perception possibly for some people in terms of decreased productivity because of this excessive number of Teams meetings, Zoom meetings. And this lack of face-to-face interaction, lack of just catching up, as Oliver said, just catching somebody for a coffee or a quick chat is making people, is enhancing the feeling of social isolation. So I think, as we said, one of the things that's causing worries about the technology and home working is this absolute pace of work. And there's a really good quote here from a male university lecturer about how they're finding problems with the pace of work and how they're reflecting on it. So what he starts to say is, I think because the physical meeting allows for post-meeting chit-chat, could be in the kitchen, could be all the way back to your office. I think that helps in a way. And I think the thing with Zoom meetings is once it's done, it's done. We have perhaps 20 people in the room, in front of you on the screen, and the next moment the meeting ends, there is total silence. And you go, oh, well, that was quite an experience. And he goes on to say, I think it's that opportunity when everyone finishes the meeting you'd had a colleague or two with whom you're walking back to the department, or you have kind of the opportunity to continue that in a more private space with a trusted colleague and just, you know, so that you don't agree with that particular view or something you think wasn't necessary. So people are really impacted by the lack of change of pace of work. The natural ebb and flow of the working day is fundamentally altered. I also have a quote, another quote from a female senior adult social care worker again, talking about the pace of work. And she says, I've also found it difficult to leave it, though. I think that is more difficult. I think going to work and coming home from work enables you to switch off better. I think going from meeting to meeting without breaks is not good for anybody. But I think to a certain extent, you kind of think when you're doing it online, you think, well, that's okay because I can stop sharing my screen. I can have a sandwich while I'm listening or that sort of thing. I think it's a little bit easier to ignore the taking the break thing. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Leela, who is going to talk to you about work-life balance.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leela Skundridaki, and I'm working as a lecturer in organization studies at the University of Edinburgh. So what I would like to do is basically raise 4 main points, and I will draw on Abigail's and Oliver's arguments and concerns raised beforehand to see how these play out when it comes to work-life balance. So the first point I wanted to make is that there are obviously a lot of individual conditions and factors, personal factors, that relate to the home working experience in terms of work-life balance. For example, whom do we live with? Do we live with a spouse? Do we live alone? Do we have children, young children, or we just live with co-residents? And then it also plays a role to consider how is our home space? How does it look like? Do we have an extra room for an office? Or do we have to work, say, in rooms that we share with others and for a variety of activities? And do we basically have adequate room to assist the demarcation between work and non-work activities and, of course, the residents? What kind of audio or visual distractions we have while we work? And then, of course, how co-residents and home interact with one another and relate back to our relationships. So do we have caring responsibilities, and do these interactions lead into conflict at home? Or at the same time give an opportunity to enjoy more the time with our family or co-residents? So just to give an example, our survey findings, I've added 4 graphs here. They all show work-life balance, starting from 1 being very poor levels of work-life balance up to 7, which is very high work-life balance. And we see how home space in reality has an impact on our work-life balance, or at least on our respondents. So for example, people that share their home working office report statistically significant lower work-life balance than those who don't share their home working space. And similarly, those that they have a dedicated room to work report higher work-life balance than those who don't. Then looking more into relationships with co-residents or family, people who feel and report that they undertake more than their fair share when it comes to domestic work, again report statistically significant lower work-life balance in comparison to those who undertake less. And we also see that parenthood plays a role, but it's basically those parents who have young children up to 10 years old that report statistically significant lower work-life balance in comparison to all other groups, including those without children. So all groups in blue indicate that the differences are not statistically significant, and same goes here. So these 2 groups are statistically significant than all the other groups. Now, another point that does worth discussing is obviously the fact that the nature of work and the employer support also play a role in our experience of how do we manage our work and life, so the work-life balance. So on the one hand, people who have strong organizational IT support or support for adjusting the home office report higher work-life balance. And then we also see that the nature of work plays a role in our experience and how we manage work and life. For example, emotionally demanding work, social care, as an example, might be very, very demanding to do at work, exactly because we don't have the networks and the support from our colleagues. And at the same time, highly creative or highly collaborative work for example, in professions such as architecture, also might suffer. I've added here, again, from our survey, 2 examples. So those of our respondents who were very confident and very happy with the IT support they had from their employers, they reported significantly higher work-life balance and quite higher than all the other groups, that they didn't feel they got so much support in terms of IT from their employer. And more interestingly, those who got, say, an allowance or a budget to buy a monitor or have a monitor or other equipment being transferred to their house so they could better set up their home office, they've also reported, so this is the group, they said definitely yes, we had good support in terms of adjusting our home working space. They had statistically significant higher work-life balance than any other group, including those that they were, to some extent, confident that they got that support. So very important, IT support, organizational support is very important, and it has an impact on work-life balance. Now, the third point I wanted to raise was the fact that talking to our interviewees, we came to realize that a lot of work-related activities that they require quite some time during the week. They are spent in our private lifetime as opposed to our working time. So to give examples and make that clear, so preparing our lunch, preparing ourselves to go to the work, commuting, taking care of how we look, even buying clothes, that all add up to at least 5 to 10 hours a week. So considering a 35 or 40 hours working week, on top we have to spend something like 5 or 10 hours on other work-related activities that they are now kind of disappearing. When working from home, we are escaping from that, and that has that gives the opportunity to spend more time, say, with our family or do other things. So we do find ourselves with more time in our hands, and that's a positive outcome. Of course, as Oliver and Abigail commented, it's not as straightforward. So this extra time that we find ourselves with comes with some concerns or challenges. So we do struggle to set new boundaries between work and non-work. We do struggle to make the transition from work to non-work. And despite that, some workers, some of our participants were faster into identifying new ways, new routines, and new rituals to manage work-life balance and these tensions and transitions. So new ways to exercise, have fun, socialize, but also creating kind of fake commutes so as to create and strengthen the boundaries between work and life. So what comes in the end? So why is that all very important? It's obviously because we might see, and we have seen for many organizations, the end of working in the office. So for a lot of workers, there will be no going back in the office after the pandemic and the lockdown measures finish. And then it becomes very important to identify, even for the ones that they are going back, the ideal split between work in the office and work at home. And again, time and space are very important in that regard. We have to manage our time better, and we have, again, to manage our space better. And as Abigail and Oliver commented just before, we see new measures coming in, policy making, and we need to consider what kind of taxation or what kind of rights we have to protect. Should there be allowances for workers working from home, and what happens to vulnerable groups? And there seems to be a need for line managers as well, because they have informally, they had to bear kind of the burden of helping out or managing their employees while they had to readjust to the new conditions and manage their work-life balance. So more training would be obviously necessary to help out with the line managers. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand on to Danny now.
Thank you, Lilia. Yes, I'm Danny Schomler, the research associate for this project, and I would like to present our findings on well-being. There's going to be a significant overlap with what my colleagues have covered already, but it will be with the focus on well-being. So first of all, at the start of the first lockdown for the new home workers, mental health declined at first, but then improved over time with adaptation to the new normal. And then during the first lockdown, mental health was significantly poorer for those new home workers with children under 10, those in insecure positions, and those who did not have a dedicated office space. And since autumn, there's currently insufficient data en masse on longer-term home working to make absolute conclusions about our current findings, about the effects, but our current findings suggest that there is a decrease in mental health due to increased work demands through the digitalization of work as new normal, and also a lack of holidays. Many just kept their annual leave and took it over into autumn, and also the extension of the workday phenomenon. So there are also these questions on the effects on careers that lead to decrease in mental health. And in terms of physical well-being, many interviews reported fluctuations in their physical well-beings. Parents of children under the age of 5 were more likely to report that they were unable to exercise sufficiently. Also, many members of our panel reported weight gain due to increased snacking, as workers were often based in the kitchen or near the kitchen with easy access to food. Overall, however, there was reporting of consuming higher quality and more locally produced food rather than a reliance on ready meals. There were also some nice stories about integrating new exercise patterns into daily life. Many reported that they were able to have more sleep during the week and therefore feeling less tired at the weekend and able to enjoy it. There were also some reports of back pain and muscle tension due to insufficient home working arrangements and a lack of breaks, even some stories of physical burnout and fatigue, also due to lack of breaks, problems to switch off, and work intensification in general. In terms of mental health, there were also a mixture of feelings reported and fluctuations in well-being, as well as contradictory experiences and levels of well-being, which are all part of the home working experience. For example, one participant reported, that's a tough question when asked about his well-being. That's a tough question to answer because some days I'm good, some days I'm bad. That's the truth. Some days I'm all energetic, I'm happy, but some days I'm just like, I don't even want to do nothing, but you just have to keep going. Actually, it's a female participant. So there were also positive accounts, happy, relaxed, and balanced accounts, which was mainly due to the ability to work autonomously, flexibly, and yeah, they set up home working arrangements, being able to physically distance oneself from work, but also accounts of psychologically distancing oneself from work effectively. Taking breaks improved mental health, but there were also stories of constraints that reduced contentments working from home. For example, care constraints, information blockages, in general, the need to juggle non-work and work tasks, and interruptions from the family. Also, a lack of buffers and routines could lead to losing track of time and wasting time. I would like to focus on 3 key findings on mental health. The first one is social isolation and reclusivity. There are 2 quotes I would like to share with you. One from a male senior project manager. He said, I think the difference is not having that face-to-face contact, as it were, that interpersonal relationship building. You can see people's body language. You can see their facial expressions when you are there in front of them. And you can do that to a degree via conference call or video conference call, but it's not quite the same in terms of, I don't know, empathy. It's very much more clinical, if you like, and a little stilted when you haven't got that person directly in front of you face to face. Or, for example, the other quote is from a young graduate, female graduate, who represents many of our young home workers and their experiences. She said, I definitely missed having a coffee break and running into someone random and having a chat and seeing how they are getting on. I think I also miss socializing just with my friends. So outside of the office is also definitely one thing that I'm missing. 2 more themes that came up on mental health, for example, a combination of uncertainty, for example, about the future, the virus, the economy, the nature of the job, various job demands, and the logistics of working from home versus in the office. This kind of ambiguity and change could elevate the risks of emotional and also physical well-being of home workers, and therefore coming under significant pressures. For some, this undermined the sense of control, assurance, and influenced their well-being and performance, and even increased cognitive and concentration difficulties. Also, inadequate home working arrangements could sometimes lead to a state of liminality, especially for participants who lived in urban areas, in smaller flats. They reported a feeling of loss of control, feeling disoriented, having this negative impact on their cognitive sharpness, and leading to a lack of motivation and lack of focus. Sometimes emotions of oppression and stress and being overwhelmed were reported, and feeling trapped. Here's a quote from a male IT support worker. He said, I think just, partly as reaction of being trapped in a bit, it's all become very, very samey, and the distance between kind of the weekends and the weekdays is less clear. But also it's the difference between kind of your social time and your non-social time is less clear too. So obviously there are therefore implications to improve the well-being of home workers on various levels. On the organizational level, it's important that organizations take stock of what is working well and what is not, and they also need to develop an evidence base of the specific risks of home working. For example, longer working hours, decreased productivity, e-presenteeism, burnout, social isolation, etc. So it's important that they provide training on well-being for home workers, and also these small grants, which my colleagues mentioned, to support equipment for home working. On a managerial level, it's important for managers to critically reflect on best practice principles for relationship-based practice. And also it's important that they enable and support informal virtual spaces for home workers, and that they recognize when home workers need greater levels of emotional scaffolding to support them to work virtually. And on a team level, it's important that teams have these virtual informal team support networks, especially where the team embodies dimensions of availability, sensitivity, acceptance, and cooperation, leading to a sense of belonging, which is very much key for resilience and well-being and effective practice of home workers. And on a personal level, there were very nice stories about home workers sharing strategies to create digital boundaries, although these are small practical changes, but they can have great psychological benefits. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to my colleague Abigail.
Thank you very much, Danny. I am just going to finish off with a couple of summary points, and also to discuss maybe some of the organisational implications of home working. So, how is COVID actually going to change the broad landscape of home working? Well, we've now all had at least 10 months of the experience of home working, and are now much more aware of the advantages and disadvantages. It's also something we're doing on a much more intense level than we were before. So typically, for those people that did have any, the 27% of people that did any home working, it was a couple of days a week. It was seen as a luxury. It was really time and space to focus on things that they deemed important in terms of their working day. Now it's very different. It's day in, day out. So we all have a much clearer experiences of the pros and cons of home working. To some extent, despite the problems that we've highlighted, it does appear people want to have a greater opportunity to work at home more. And I think organisations in particular are also reflecting that desire. But for both employees and organisations, there's going to have to be really careful consideration of how we manage this new desire to work, or to work back home, in the sense that actually home working was something that was very normal until maybe 150 years ago. But how do we support this? How do organisations support this? And how do individuals cope? We don't have any clear answers to this yet, but what we do have a lot of questions that need answering. So what is the optimal balance between home working, teleworking and office-based work, both for the individual and the organisation? I think we're getting some sense at the moment that at the beginning of the pandemic, people were very enamoured by by home working. They could see the real strength of it. Now I think people are becoming a bit more wary and are much more aware. And although we're still getting the sense that people do want to work at home more, I think the enthusiasm is waning a little. So how can we make it work on a longer term basis? How can we make it a positive experience? How can we make it work for those that want to work at home, but also allow the opportunities to go to the office for those that want to? How can the organisation have that optimal balance for them, ensuring that people are in the office at the right time? How can we take account of the environmental impact of home working? So in winter, when we have increased heating bills and an increased environmental impact of home working in the winter, how do we balance that? How can IT systems be optimised for the best home working experience? What are the wider implications of greater home working? So in terms of terms and conditions, rights and responsibilities, taxation and pay. We're hearing things in the press about threats of increased taxation for home workers, penalties, financial salary penalties for working at home. How can we make sure that people are not treated unfairly and people have the same opportunities when home working and working in the office? As my colleagues mentioned, the home office space can sometimes not be ideal. As Oliver said, we're seeing increased incidents of back pain, musculoskeletal problems. How do we avoid that? What are the organisation's responsibility for the home office environment? We need to ensure there's equality of opportunity. There is a possibility that women are going to be unfairly disadvantaged by a move to home working, despite having many benefits for them in terms of promotion and pay advancement. There could also be constraints. How do we ensure that these problems with the work-life boundary that we're seeing for home workers at the moment are not occurring in the longer term? So finally, I'd just like to say that this is the summary findings of our Working at Home project, which is Where Does Work Belong Anymore? The Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic on Working in the UK. We'd like to, again, a big thank you to all our participants. You've been absolutely fantastic. And please, if you've got any comments, please add it to the chat function below or the feedback section below. Thank you very much from the whole team. Thank you.